Hey everyone. Today we're going to look at how to deploy Wildfly to CentOS 7, and we're going to pair that up with OpenJDK8. So before we continue, I kind of wanted to explain my reasoning behind the sudden interest in an application server when the entirety of the world seems to be swinging towards microservices and platforms like Docker, Kubernetes, and OpenShift, which build on top of each other. So the reasoning there is speed of delivery and needless complexity introduced by those platforms. So all of those systems are fantastic, but they are not necessary when you're launching a product, when you're looking to tighten the feedback loop from your product owner, from your business partner. So something like a Tomcat, an application server like Wildfly that basically does a lot for you in the beginning in terms of heavy lifting and can also scale, is going to be very beneficial. So I'm trying to test out that hypothesis, and I found myself looking really hard for a shortened documentation piece online that was actually accurate and could successfully deploy this thing. So anyway, that being said, let's get started. So I will be doing this in a DigitalOcean droplet, and I recently found that they actually pass through virtualization to their VMs. So I installed VirtualBox. That turns out it's kind of a memory hog. So I nuked a bunch of them, but I think what we can do is we can provision another one, and we will start with a fresh install of CentOS 7, and we can go from there.
Okie dokie. So here we are. We are SSH'd into our DigitalOcean box. And just to make sure, we'll do a quick check, and these are indeed strange IPs. Just a quick heads up as to what we're working with. Typically, I forward all of the ports that I will need. So Wildfly opens up 8080 and 8443 for the applications it serves. Also, I forward 22 out to the host as well, so I can SSH directly into the virtual machine. And then the management panel typically runs on 9990 if you are running it without HTTPS or SSL. So I don't want to have to reload the machine in the middle of something, so I just take care of everything. You'll notice at the bottom I'm cheating a little bit, so I pre-install the utilities and OpenJDK8 that the blog post mentions. So I am going to kick off the Vagrant provisioning, and I will pick it up when it's done. So we'll see you in a few. Okay, so we are good to go. Let's proceed. We want to Vagrant SSH into our newly created machine, and we are indeed in that machine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pop in as root so that I don't get bothered by permissioning while I'm installing and so on. So first things first, let's make sure we have Vim installed, because it will drive me nuts if we don't. And look at that. Missed it on the Vagrant script. Alright. So with JDK8 installed, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and set Java home, add that to path, and then also set class path. Now, I found this in a gist somewhere. I cannot remember where. Otherwise, I would totally link you guys as that having been a resource. So, quick thing that I do in every config file that I put out when I provision a system, I usually put in a comment at the very top with the location of the file. That way there's no mystery if I'm looking at it myself or somebody's maintaining stuff that I've done. So what this will do is it will make it so that we have Java home set whenever we open a session. So with that file created, the next thing that we need to do is we need to make it executable. So we will do just that. So because I don't want to log out and log back in, I'm just going to source it, and then I will echo Java home, and hopefully we have a result. Look at that. So if you're wondering, I am copying and pasting from my own blog post, and this makes me very happy. Now this means that we have all the tools that we need to go ahead and grab Wildfly next. So we will change directory into temp. That way the system will clean stuff up for us if we forget, and then we will go ahead and grab Wildfly 15. So I saw quite a few tutorials on how to do this, and they basically had you copy the extracted folder from temp to opt and then symlink it in opt. However, Wildfly got very, very angry when I did that, so we're just going to go ahead and move it. So with our directory created in opt, we will cd into it. Now we need a Wildfly user so that the process doesn't execute with root level privileges or some escalated level of privilege. And while we're on the topic, we are not messing with SE Linux. We will leave that enabled. So nothing that we do should cause us to need to disable it. Wildfly is a Red Hat product, and so is SE Linux, or at least they adopted it. So first we need to create SE Wildfly so that we can put our config files and goodies out there. And then we're going to start copying the templates out of the downloaded and extracted folder. So here I'm just creating the config file and the location output files folders. So once we have that, what we can do is we can grab the systemd template and copy that out there as well. I might actually get rid of that because I made so many changes to this template that I will likely not remember what I did, and the blog post has the version that I found to be successful. So what did we just do? Let's see. We made an Etsy Wildfly folder. That is where we put our configuration file. We then created a log output directory. We then copied the template for the systemd service, and then the launch script where the systemd service expects it to be. So by default, what you're going to see when you look at this guy is something of this nature. I don't quite understand why this is done, but what I found was there's an extra dash here. Maybe that's for safety, maybe it's so that you're not just running around with defaults or whatnot, but that kind of threw me through a loop. So what I will do is actually, there we go. And again, as I mentioned before, I usually throw in the location of what we're working on at the very top. So we have our service set up. You will notice, actually, I should just pull that back up. You will notice that one of the key differences is that I'm actually outputting the standard error and out to syslog, whereas the default configuration was just dropping it. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to be able to capture that output. So we will add ourselves a file in etc rsyslog-d wildfly server configuration. And what that's going to do is it's basically going to look at our program name that we set in the systemd service configuration, which was just wildfly server. And if the program name matches, then we will put out to this log file, and we will also drop to syslog as well. So that having been set up, I am actually going to just restart syslog, even though we don't need it quite yet. So then the next thing we need to do is we need to configure the management console, and this is where a ton of the tutorials and documentation kind of fell short for me. So first things first, what we need to do is we need to generate a key to use for the management portal. So I'm guessing nobody wants to run this thing without SSL. So mostly every tutorial I ran into basically had you just change what you were listening on, and that was it. Problem with that is that because of the authentication mechanism, that will actually break Wildfly and you won't be able to log in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cd into the standalone configuration, and then what we will do is have a look-see in here. So you'll notice that there's the standalone.xml, which we will be running with, but then the see here, thing we're missing is a key. So very long, probably confusing, so we're going to use key tool. We're going to generate a 2488-bit key. We're going to call it server.keystore. Remember the key pass and then also the store password. These will need to be set in standalone.xml. So update this with your values or what is relevant to your deployment. But let's go ahead and generate that. And if we and there we go. Now you'll notice we have a little bit of a problem. Oops. Good thing this isn't a production. This is not a production box. Okay, so with that generated, we're ready to modify the standalone XML file. So there are a few things in here that we need to tweak. The first thing that we are going to do is we're going to go ahead and actually let me point this out to you guys. So if you look at the application realm, because the application realm foresees that people are going to want SSL for whatever they try to deploy to Wildfly, has that configuration preset. But if you look at the management realm, it is distinctly missing the SSL entry. So because I didn't pick up on that right away, I spent quite a few hours trying to figure out why I was being told that I hadn't created any users or something of that nature. It was a very confusing error message. So just to avoid that, we're going to, whoops, not forget. And yes, I am not the greatest at Vim. So that's step number one. The next thing that we need to do is change the management interface itself. So if you just scroll down a little bit or just search, you'll notice the management interface is here. There are two values you want to change, and this is another one that I didn't quite notice because it wasn't pointed out. You want to change the socket binding of HTTPS, and then you also want to change the value as well. So this is actually defined. Excuse me. This is defined down below. So we are now set up to listen on 9993, which is the SSL enabled port. The very last thing we need to do is we need to expose our services. So you'll notice that the management portal and the application server both bind to the local IP. So we don't want that. We actually want to listen at everything. So we're going to update this to just 0.0, 0.0. So that is the last change that we need to make in standalone.xml. So that configures Wildfly. It provides us with a service configuration and so on. The very last thing we need to do is we need to generate a user that we can use with our management panel. And we can do that by just running add user. It's a little utility script provided by the good folks at Wildfly. And what we want to do is we want to add a management user. So I will pick A. I'll say wild admin, and then here comes the password. So let's see. Oh, it doesn't like it. Come on now. There we go. I'm not going to add to any other groups, and that is indeed correct. This very last question, we're not going to be doing anything of the distributed variety right now, so I'm just going to answer no. So now we have a user. So with all that being set up, we need to do a quick daemon reload so that we pick up all our changes. We then need to start the Wildfly service. And just for good measure, there it is. Whoops, man, fat fingers today. Let's see, and then there's the very last bit of output out of tail. So we are indeed listening on 9993. Which is the SSL enabled management port. So just for the sake of being complete, let's just grab the entire output. So this is what a server start looks like. You'll see many of these when you restart the service, hopefully not too often, because that does bring down your application if you're only running one instance. So let's check and make sure that we are indeed listening on ports we expect. So 8080 is the applications that we deploy, and that is the HTTP bind, SSL bind for the applications, and there's the management console. So with that, we have a successful deployment. I can go ahead and pop back into this machine, and then we can look at it in a browser. The SSH configuration for the Vagrant deployment. We are going to want to enable password authentication for just a bit. Please do not leave that on a production server. So we do want to allow root to log in. And we want to be able to, oops, actually that's not what we want to do. We want to specifically say yes. So that having been done, now we can SSH back into our box. So these are the ports I exposed, and if all goes well, I don't think I have any firewalls enabled on that host. We should be able to pop right into the box itself. $1 million question is, what is root's password? And now we know. So if you're going to keep the deployment around, you're obviously going to want to copy your keys and all that good stuff, but just for the sake of this video, we're not going to worry about it. So one thing I'll point out is the funky looking SSH command that I threw out. So basically I am mapping 20,013 to localhost, and what we should be able to do is in theory visit this locally, and we will get the management console for Wildfly. So while I get my browser ready, I will take a little bit of a break. So I'm so used to doing this, I didn't even realize I didn't need to. Typically I tunnel in through SSH to manage these machines. I obviously don't just expose these ports if they're production boxes, but in this particular instance it's not a production box, so we can do whatever we want. So the SSH tunnel was not necessary, so we can just pull up a browser and directly visit the IP and port that we have publicly available for all to see. Okie dokie, as promised, we can just go to the public IP address and see our handiwork. So the port I was trying to forward was 20,013. And we are being told that it is an invalid HTTP response, which is actually good news because we want HTTPS to pop. So since we generated our own certificate, we're getting a little bit of complaints out of our good buddy Chrome, but we can just ignore that because we know we just generated our own cert. So typically what I will do with this type of setup is I will use something like Kong or TYK, or some sort of a routing gateway so that I can route the traffic to the virtual machine or Docker container that I'm interested in. And that way I don't have to manually configure Nginx and so on, which let's see, and then I had our little monster password. And there we go. That is our handiwork. So we can look through deployments. Obviously there are none. One of the things that you're probably going to want to do right away is take care of the data sources. So by default, Wildfly comes set up with H2. You're going to likely want to do Postgres or MySQL or Oracle database or SQL Server. I will do another video on how to do that. It's actually immensely easier than what we just went through. And let's see here. I think we even have a data source set up. Yep, cool. So you can get started and you can point your application to this example data source if you have one to deploy out here. So feel free to play, and we'll see you later.